Hey Northway, welcome back to the podcast. We are so glad you're here. My kids let me know this morning we are just 20 days away from Christmas.
Whoa,
Can you believe
days.
it?
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? You ready? You excited? You have your shirt on?
I got my Eaton Park shirt on. Favorite commercial. It's Christmas season. Brooke pulled it out. She's like, you should wear this. I'm like, you're right. It's
this
the best.
is the time.
It's the time. 'Tis the season.
You ready for Christmas?
Our house has been decorated. We are not, I used to be after Thanksgiving. We decorated first week of November. Enjoy it. We are sort of in the process of shopping. Plans are set. So we're 70%.
That's trending upward. That's great.
We're definitely on the upswing. Yeah.
Well, we are moving on in to December, but we just wrapped the last week of our 10 Commandment series, 11 weeks.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah. Yes and no. Yeah. Yeah. It was way more than I hoped and expected it would be. It was a fun journey. You know, when you start a series, you don't fully know how it's going to feel. You don't know how it's going to end and ultimately how it's going to shape. I think the Lord speaks as we're working through this stuff, not just in our preparation mode too. So I've loved it. I've loved every minute. I've loved listening to other people. I've loved being able to teach in it.
What's been most impactful? Like, what are some big takeaways that you feel like you'll walk away from this study with?
For me, the whole idea of being kept versus trying to keep them, revolutionary to me. Like, God really wants to keep us as his people. And so there's something beautiful about trusting him. That was revolutionary to me. That idea of contempt, you introduced that with the murder one. And there's really a contempt thread through all of this. Maybe coveting is holding God in contempt.
Yeah. Wow.
Like, you didn't do enough
Right.
for me. So that's, like, it amazes me, to me, how much can go back to the garden and the image of God, and how we see other people and how we're viewing God. And so when Jesus says, hey, really, there's 2 commandments, love God, love your neighbor. I mean, it's a common thread throughout the Bible. So and this is going to sound awful, amazed at how relevant the 10 commandments still are. Yes. And they speak. And Jesus refreshed them by saying, it's what's going on in your heart too. So I mean, I think that was 4 or 5 takeaways. I've loved it. I say this, I love going to church at Northway. I love sitting and listening and learning and not knowing all the time what's going to be taught. And it was a great fall.
Yeah. I think every week I was like, oh, this one's my favorite. Like, this one applies so much. And then we get to the next week and I'd be like, oh, shoot, this one also applies so much. And I think it's a great kind of reminder that the Old Testament is relevant and important to study, and to take 11 weeks like that and really dig in. And yes, lens it through Jesus, but that's how we read the whole Old Testament.
That's right.
So that's
revealed.
Yes. There we go. Back
Shameless
to revealed.
plug.
Shameless
for
plug.
revealed.
If you haven't done that, jump on in.
Yeah. If you have finished Rooted, you should now start Revealed.
Yes, in January.
That's
That would be a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Going back to that idea of being kept, I agree. That's such a powerful thought, and not keeping them. How does that help you think about parenting or talking to your kids just about following Jesus or rules or obedience?
That's a great question. I think parenting isn't just about our kids, right? We think it's just about our kids, but spiritually, I think when we have kids, God is using, just like God uses your spouse to sanctify you, to make you holy, he uses our kids to teach us who he is. And so the whole journey of parenting is an experience not of, yes, it's discipling our kids. Yes, it's training them. But at the end of the day, they have to say yes on their own to Jesus. So we can't take credit and we can't take blame ultimately for that, right? It's their heart. So a lot of the journey of parenting is learning how to be kept by Jesus through the journey. Like how him to sustain you, how to experience grace in a new way when your kids walk in a season that you wish they wouldn't walk in. We've just, junior high it's a hard season, not just because of hormones and the physiological changes. It's just it's a season where kids are learning independence at a new level. That's really hard as parents, to allow Jesus to keep you through that. Because sometimes you can get very angry with your kids in that season. You can get very disappointed with your kids in this as they're trying to figure out, who am I? What does it look like to really follow Jesus or follow the crowd? That's been the journey in our household for our kids. And so as parents, navigating that, waiting on the Lord, it's a keeping season. It's him keeping you and helping you look for fruit like grander fruit, not just everyday rights and wrongs, like what the fruit of their heart. Is there still tenderness there? I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful way to think about it. How do you, I guess inside of that, or just in life in general, how can you identify that, yes, God is keeping me? Like, what are some markers that you look for? I think, you mentioned peace in your sermon, maybe being one of them. What are some other just markers of being kept by God where you can kind of identify, am I trying to keep something in my own strength, or am I allowing myself to be kept by God?
Yeah, I think I'd probably go back to the story I talked about with Florida, and I would really look at the reconciling of your expectations. Because whenever we have, I heard a quote a long time ago, when our desires, it's great to have desires. When our desires turn into expectations, that's often when we are now trying to keep ourselves. I expected that trip to look a certain way. So shockingly, a lot of people came up and they're like, I'm so sorry your trip was a bust. And they were like feeling really bad for me. And I told that story about the Wednesday and how hard it was. There were also some really great moments on the trip, like really great moments, fun times. I didn't talk about those because sometimes our expectations blind us to those. So sometimes our expectations predetermine where God's going to move and what he's going to do and what his goodness is supposed to look like. But that's us keeping us. Okay, God, here's my Christmas list. Here's what Florida should look like when he delivered beauty in some other way, some good conversations. My kids got to watch movies with their grandfather that week. And like, they're going to remember that forever. Way more than any experience or meal. So is that the goodness of God? Yes. Was it my expectation of God? No. So it's that gap between desires and expectations. I think as followers of Jesus, it's better to be surprised than to just, okay, my expectations are met. You were supposed to do that. I want to be surprised with God. And I got to fight to stay on that desire side. That's the keeping. Yes. That's a metaphorical answer, but you know what it's like to have expectations. It's the same in our marriages. Like, I need to have desires for our marriage of Brooke, but not expectations. Because if Brooke just meets an expectation of mine, okay, you were supposed to do that. But to meet like a desire, that's like a surprise gift on Christmas. Like, I love having gifts that I want on Christmas, but I love surprises. Because if it's a gift I already wanted and I already knew and I tried it on and I was there when you bought it, what's the point? Like, thanks for wrapping that up. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think God wants to, the priestly blessing involves the Lord keeping us. So I was talking with Mary Mercer, who's a prayer pastor on our staff. She was like, let's have a conversation about that keeping. And I'm like, I think you're right. We need to let's dig into that more. There's more there. So long-winded answer. I do that a lot because I get so excited. It's such a big, God is so good.
Yes. And we
so good
muddy the waters when we put those expectations or have that entitled mindset.
Entitlement.
And I think that totally goes back to looking over there because it's like, no, I deserve that. I want that. God, you should, I'm doing this. You should provide that for me.
Yeah. We shift him into a transaction, like it's a consumeristic, okay, so here's your end of the bargain. No.
And really, those expectations pale in comparison to the good gifts he wants to give us.
Yes.
And if we could we're so busy looking over there that we miss that his surprise gifts, to use your metaphor, are better than we could even imagine.
My boys' memory with their grandfather watching those movies is better than any experience I could have paid for or dreamt up while being in Orlando.
But that's not always the highlight reel, or the comparison is like, oh, we should be giving our kids these things.
Right. Yeah.
And then we get stuck into that trap.
So it all comes back to how evil social media is, right?
It does.
How dangerous.
You can start that fast again today before Christmas.
Hey, come on. That sometimes ruins our Christmas.
No, well,
look, scrolling on social and saying, well, oh, look what they did, or look what they got. It's always their highlight reel. I didn't talk about this with the tables. The tables is actually a comparison of highlight reel, not everyday reel. It's the stuff that shows really well.
Yes.
And here's another thing we forget. I also didn't get to talk about this. There's a third table in that illustration of here and there. Someone is comparing their here with your here. And they don't even have a TV on their table. They don't even have a purse. Maybe it's a plastic bag. That's gone from our perspective. The fact that what we have is also something someone else is coveting. That's humbling.
It is
to think that way.
And it's back to, not like we want to drill down too much on social media, but I think that that's a really good point. And there's that, common phrase that comparison is the thief of joy. Oh. But that idea of comparison being that first step in that progression, yep. I think social media is just an invitation to comparison. And if you are already struggling with coveting, maybe putting social media aside for a season, or especially in a season Absolutely. Like this where it's like, oh, everyone's getting a vacation, or yep. everyone's giving their kids yep. all these things on the their table. What are some other things? So let's
Can I say one more thing about social media? Yeah, please do. When we give our dog medicine, he doesn't like taking it, so it has to be wrapped in peanut butter. Mm-hmm. That's what social media is. There's a good thing about social media. Mm-hmm. You can reconnect with somebody. You can see like a cool picture, but there's also something in there that, although that's maybe a bad example because medicine is good for you, but it's like something bad for you wrapped in peanut butter, if you can follow my example, right? There's a little bit of good. The peanut butter's good, but at the end of the day, it's just covering up what's bad. Mm-hmm. That's how the devil works. Mm-hmm. He's subtle and he's sneaky, and he delivers a little bit of like sweetness, but at the end of the day, it's just to trap you. Mm-hmm. It's just to like wreck our hearts and take us down that comparison, yep. discontentment, distrust, disorder path. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah. Social media all day. What are some other things like that, sometimes I think it's us being proactive and saying, this leads me down a path of wanting to go there, or mm-hmm. covetousness. If that is social media, then I might need to put that aside for a season. Mm-hmm. What might be some other things to help us think through, like, oh, that's a place that generally leads to covetousness for me. Maybe I need to step out of that for a second.
I think this might answer your question. I didn't get to talk about this. This ended up like in the gutter, what I call, I just didn't have time for it in the sermon. But we have to really take an honest look at our sense of purpose in this world. Like, what's your why? Like, why are you working in that arena? Why are you going to that thing with your time? Why is it so important for your kids to be involved in this activity? And our purposes will directly reveal whose glory we're living for mm-hmm. and toward. And so if you ever wonder, like, why do we talk about short-term missions? Why do we talk about serving in the church? Because when our life is wrapped around, like peanut butter around medicine, wrapped around God's purposes, when you're giving yourself to God's kingdom, it's moving away from covetousness because you're now living for his glory. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't just mean at the church. That means, like, what's your purpose for being a lawyer? What's your purpose in retirement? What's your purpose for sending your kids there? Is it just to socialize while your kids are playing soccer, or are you trying to maybe bring some people to Jesus? When that's your purpose, you're not as interested in comparison and in things. Mm-hmm. So there is like a purpose gap in our world mm-hmm. where covetousness leads to just the purpose of self mm-hmm. and personal pleasure. That's why I have a friend who works in a job, and he is so... he and his wife are so focused on who can they help bring to know Jesus, mm-hmm. the people they work with. So literally, when they go away on trips for work, they are thinking about how can we potentially share the gospel with these people. Mm-hmm. And they are some of the people that are least trapped by covetousness that I know in my life. And financially, they're doing great. They're doing great.
So free.
They're doing great. They're free. They're not trapped by the trappings of things. That's another piece, like, from the sermon. And by the way, a Louis Vuitton purse, it's not evil. I was not trying to say that. And nobody accused me of that. Like having a big TV. I have a big TV in my house. I love to watch the Steelers on the big TV and UNC Tar Heels. It's college basketball season, right? It's the wanting and desiring of that, and our sense of purpose, where we're aiming, what's the ultimate win of what we're doing with our time, that can lead toward or away from covetousness. Mm-hmm. It comes back to that path principle.
Yes, and where your eyes are. And even you had that point about perfect peace when your eyes are fixed on God. Yeah. And I think that's part of that peace, is when you're fixed on the purpose that he has for your life, instead of this purpose that you're creating or just fulfillment of pleasure or self. Mm-hmm. That peace mm-hmm. comes. And I loved so much your point mm-hmm. of, a lot of times we think it's patience, that if we just save enough money or wait long enough, then we'll somehow achieve both peace and the things we want. But it's actually not that at all. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Dave Ramsey's strategies are great. They're very practical. They're wonderful. I brought Dave Ramsey.
I think he's been canceled.
I think he has been. But the idea of like saving and not getting buried by consumer debt, strike the fact that I mentioned Dave Ramsey, right? Everybody's canceled anymore,
I know. I don't
right?
even know.
You're canceled. I'm canceled.
He's great if you follow him.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's some wisdom to the tips he talks about with our finances. But that doesn't deal with the problem in our heart. Mm-hmm. Like getting things the right way. It doesn't end covetousness, because you can then just say like, well, now I want those other things, and maybe I'll just have to wait and get those the right way. It's really that wanting and the why we're wanting it. That idea about it's not an issue of economics. For a long time in my life, I thought it was. Like I've always thought, well, I had a number in my head. If I can just make X more a month, then we'll be good. And here's what happens. I make X more a month, and then I need more, and then I want more. So it's not about money. It's not about the paycheck. It's about the wanting and the. John Riley, I've said this a couple of times. John, shout out to you. He said coveting is a spiritual issue. He said it a long time ago, and I didn't fully like grasp until this sermon like what he was actually talking about. It's going on in our hearts.
You just celebrated John Riley, practicing one of your two Paul principles. So you ended your sermon talking about both celebration and gratitude, and those being powerful tools. What does it look like for you to celebrate someone, especially in the areas? I think it's easy to celebrate things that we don't covet. So if I'm not a car person, I can celebrate your car all day long because I don't care if I have a Range Rover or don't have a Range Rover. But if you have something that I aspire to, it's a lot harder for me to celebrate you. Where is it hard for you to show celebration?
In the areas I want to be great at. I want to be a great teacher. And it is so important for me in my heart to celebrate other teachers when they do a great job. Like one of the first things I did, JJ Falto taught. He's our discipleship director at Wexford. So sometimes we go live weekends. So the sermon John taught, John was the broadcast capture one. He's in our archives. But JJ taught live in Wexford. I went and I watched JJ, and I wanted to encourage and celebrate him. That's the first thing I did on Monday before I started my work. That's a discipline of mine. I want to thank people. I want to encourage them because I don't want to be jealous of them. And so I try to send you a text or an email. Hey, phenomenal sermon, and here's what it was, and it's not. It moves beyond a strategy to a genuine thing from your heart. I hope it feels and seems genuine. I don't know.
Yeah, but like you said, the feelings follow the obedience.
Feelings follow obedience. Yeah.
In those times.
Yeah. The first couple times I started doing that at my last church. So I would just say this: recognize what's the area you want to be great in, and the way you keep that from becoming an idol is you celebrate that in other people. And guess what? It causes me to learn from Amanda when she teaches. It causes me to learn from Scott when he teaches, and JJ when he teaches, and John Riley. It humbles our hearts. It's a really, really big deal. And I also, around my areas of disappointment, it helps break disappointment from ruling my heart. So that experience with the rental car, God started whispering to me, even before I started complaining to him about being thankful. I was in that first rental car place when they didn't have any cars. And the woman there, her name is Ava. She was phenomenal to me. She was like goodness of God, like an angel. I mean, so kind, so caring. She told me what to do. I was so flustered. I had just taken my first Uber ride in my life, and I was nervous about that.
Congrats.
Yeah, and then I had to take another one. So hey, I'm an Uber experienced person. And like I felt the Lord just like leading me to acknowledge her and thank her, because working at a rental car company job around the holidays, that can be so thankless. I asked her for her business card. When I got home later that night, I ended up making a call back to her to say thanks, because I'm learning that even in our disappointment, gratitude, expressed thanks helps prevent that from just ruling our hearts. It's darkness, and it can just kind of take over, and it becomes all that you see. And so I called Ava and thanked her, because I imagine working at a rental car company, you don't get to see the success stories. And at the end of the day, I did get a replacement car, and I was back home safe, and everything was okay. And Ava was a big part of that. So I called her and thanked her. She did not know what to do when she answered that call.
Sure that's probably the first thank you call Ava's ever received.
Brooke looked at me. She's like, what are you doing? Why? I was like, because I need to. It's like for my heart. Sometimes you just gotta you gotta do those things.
It's learning the secret of being content.
And the Holy Spirit isn't just nudging me in these things. He's nudging all of us. And it's those, gosh, it doesn't make any sense. Do it. In the words of Pastor Kent, do it afraid.
Yeah.
Do it afraid. That's a phenomenal, like I think about Kent all the time. When I'm a little bit afraid, do it afraid.
Yep.
So.
It's so good. And so gratitude, just jumping off of that, we are heading into a brand new Christmas series this weekend.
Yeah.
That you really had the idea to work through this idea of remembering and being thankful.
Yeah.
Just in this last minute we have, what does that look like at Christmas to remember and be thankful? And how will that help posture our hearts?
Yeah. So gratitude's a big deal to me. I think Christmas and the presents and the gifts and the celebration and the decorations and the music and the shopping, when it's beautiful to be out there with lights on, and I love all that stuff. I just don't want to get lost the fact of how significant and amazing the gift of Jesus is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the we're going to look at specifically Zechariah, right?
Yeah, right.
Or Zechariah?
Tomato.
Zezec. I forget how it's spelled. It's like a kind of a buried portion of it's not the Magi, it's not the manger. It's a little, but he says some things in there that, like, when you look at his words after he was mute for a while, he wasn't allowed to talk, and then he finally speaks. He declares some things about Jesus that if we remember these things, it should cause our hearts in the middle of all the consumerism and the gifts and the celebration and the plans and the pictures. We should be thankful because I never want us to forget this was a divine moment from God for us. He sent his son.
It changed everything.
Changes everything.
Yeah.
And that's what Christmas is ultimately about. And the other stuff, it's icing, but this is the cake. It's Jesus. That's and awesome. Remembering these little details should cause our hearts to just pause and say, thank you, God, for your goodness.
That's so good. So we're diving into that this weekend. This wraps our podcast for this season. We will be back end of January, right?
Yeah, so the network's picked up season 2, so we were super excited to get that call. It's going to kick off like late January. We're going to do a series talking about meals Jesus had. I love food, so I'm so pumped about this series. In Luke, Jesus was either on his way to a meal, he was at a meal, or he was coming from a meal. So meals were a big deal to Jesus, and they should be to us. They tell us a lot about who he is and who he was. So we're going to do the Behind and Beyond starting end of January with that meals series. So
awesome.
Season 2, Rebecca will be back. Yep. Teachers will be back. It's going to be fun.
All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.